most of us don't really set boundaries until we're already furious. See, we let things slide and we give the benefit of the doubt and we swallow it down, and then one day we just snap. And by the time the boundary comes out, it's not really a line anymore. It's more like this explosion. See, we've mistaken suppression for peace, and people pleasing for compassion, and avoidance for grace, until our body basically says no more. This is Uber Bintegers, where integrity grounds us and where intimacy helps bring us home. So let's talk a little bit about how to set boundaries from self-respect and not from anger. Because boundaries that come from burnout will protect us, but they also tend to isolate us as well. Whereas boundaries that come from self-respect, they do something different. They honor our dignity and they preserve the connection, and they don't punish, they clarify. See, when anger is the alarm and not the enemy, is a really good place to start considering. Like, anger isn't the problem, I would say. Anger is more like the notification symbol, right? Anger tells us something has crossed the line. It tells us that our energy or time or value has in essence been violated. And here's the thing though. The danger here is that most of us ignore the first few alarms or notifications, and we silence them with politeness, and we tell ourselves, it's not worth making the fuss there, right? Or we rationalize saying, maybe they didn't really mean it, until that silence becomes unbearable, until we've tolerated so much disrespect that when we actually finally speak, it comes out sharp and loud and explosive. And that's not weakness, I would say. That's like the overflow. It's the cost of waiting until we're angry to honor what was true all along. Anger is that signal, I think. But I would argue that self-respect is the solution. See, boundaries that are built from self-respect don't wait for the collapse. They prevent that collapse. See, boundaries from self-respect sound something like when our boundaries come from anger, for example, they sound like, I'm done with everyone, right? Or I can't believe you did this again. Or don't ever talk to me again, right? That's how they usually come out. And they're rooted in pain of that reaction. And I mean, sometimes they're necessary, right? Sometimes the only way to regain power is to step back completely. But boundaries from self-respect, they sound different. They sound like, yikes, I'm not available for this tone, right? Or I love you, but this does not work for me. Or I'm not angry, I just have reached my limit. Or I can't have this conversation when it feels disrespectful. See, there's no rage there, there's no defense, there's no guilt, it's just clarity. Because when we know our worth, we don't need to yell it, we just live it. And integrity, like as far as boundaries in the alignment zone, integrity is really about living in that alignment with your truth. And boundaries are really how integrity gets expressed in our relationships that we're in. And when we say things like, I want peace, but we're constantly let the chaos back in, we're coming out of integrity there, right? When we say, I value respect, but we tolerate disrespect, we're out of integrity again there. When we say things like, I need rest, but then we keep saying yes to every demand, we're out of integrity. Integrity really asks, what's true for me? Or what protects my wholeness, right? What allows me to stay honest without losing myself? Boundaries aren't barriers to love. They're more like containers for it. They define where intimacy can safely exist. Without boundaries, relationships become these negotiations of tolerance. Whereas with boundaries, relationships now become partnerships of clarity. Integrity is what keeps our boundaries from becoming these ego walls, if you will. It keeps them rooted in honesty and not in hostility. It reminds us that saying no is not a rejection. It's a declaration of value, right? And intimacy is where like the boundaries can deepen that connection. We often think that intimacy means letting people in completely, but intimacy actually means letting people in truthfully. See, boundaries, they make this possible. Without boundaries, we start hiding and we start resenting and we start pretending. We nod when we want to say no, right? We smile when we really feel unseen. We stay silent when our voice is just longing to speak. And that's not intimacy, that's accommodation there. See, true intimacy can only exist where there is honesty. And honesty requires limits. Intimacy says, I trust you enough to be clear, or I love you enough to be honest. I respect you enough to not fake peace. And when we stop setting boundaries like reactively and we start setting them relationally, we in essence are inviting people, others to meet us in that zone of truth. And some people will happily do so, whereas others won't. But the ones who do, those are your people. Because people who are safe with your boundaries are people who are also safe with your truth. Now, there's a cost to boundary-less living, I would say. When we live without boundaries, resentment will most likely build up. And resentment is, I think, what happens when we say yes, but when we really mean no. Every time that we betray our own limits to stay liked, we're in essence chipping away at our self-respect. Every time that we minimize our discomfort to keep the peace, we lose a piece of ourselves, I would say. And every time that we overextend out of guilt, we're in essence teaching others that our exhaustion is available on demand. And then we call this love, right? But it's not love. It's fear that's wearing generosity's mask. Boundaries are not the enemy of love. They're proof of love. Because love without self-respect is dependency, not devotion. And you can't build intimacy with people who only love the person, the version of you that only ever overgives. See, you deserve to exist in relationships where your limits are respected as much as your yeses. So here's how to set some boundaries, especially before you inevitably burn out. And the simple way to consider beginning this shift is notice when your response of anger comes up. Notice that early as you can. When you feel that tightness or that internal, you're right, that's a cue. And don't dismiss it. Ask, what boundary needs to be expressed before this transitions into resentment? Translate anger into clarity. Instead of, you always cross my boundaries, try, I need more space around this zone here. Instead of, I'm down with everyone, try say, I'm trying to choose to step back right now. Can I have a bit of space? Let go of the guilt. Guilt is just, it's often conditioning. The feeling that says, if I care, I should tolerate this, right? No. You can care deeply and still decline participation. Because remember, clarity is kindness. Unspoken boundaries confuse people, whereas spoken boundaries give everyone a fair chance to honor what's real. And boundaries don't break relationships. It's the pretending that does. And living from worth, see, boundaries from self-respect aren't really about control as much as they are about care. They say, I'm responsible for my energy and I'm allowed to protect my peace. See, I can love you and I can still choose me. And when we are able to do this consistently, something profound changes. And that's we stop seeing boundaries as weapons and now start seeing them as mirrors. Mirrors that can reflect how much we've grown. Mirrors that remind us that we don't need to earn the right to say no. Mirrors that show us love. That a love that requires self-betrayal is not love, right? And integrity teaches us that we ought to stay honest with ourselves. Intimacy will say, how can we stay open? And together, those two, they teach us the best boundaries that aren't defensive, but are more so devotional. And they protect our ability to love well. My dear listener, tomorrow in our next episode, we're going to take this journey even further, and we're going to talk a little bit about living from internal alignment and what it means to act from our worth instead of chasing after it. But for today, practice this beginning. Set one small boundary, not from anger, but from respect. Because peace doesn't come from being liked. Peace comes from being aligned. I appreciate you watching. I'll see you in tomorrow's episode.